Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. I'm a little short on how the past week went. It's not like I went on some lost weekend binge or anything. You guys know me better than that. I'm the most straight-edge guy in the world. But not a ton sticks out in memory. I did get a pretty long run in on Saturday morning with the guys, about 15 miles. And if I get in my regular run on Thursday, we do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, blah, blah, blah. If I do that, it looks like I'll set a new personal record for miles in a month. So that's something. I did a lot of reading, but that was either for upcoming guests or about death. So no point in going into that. I made some art, including a neat watercolor of the church where Rilke is buried. I'm starting to do more multi-day art, so there are fewer pieces to talk about. I also try to get in a couple sketches a day as part of my ongoing, what the heck am I even trying to do here project. But it's been neat not having to post something every day. I started to build that expectation for myself, and it turned into a reason to click on things and see if there are likes and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of short-circuited that by saying I'm going to dump all my art for the week every Friday or whenever I feel like it on Twitter and Instagram. And that way it'll just get lost in the algorithm and I don't have to think about why people aren't clicking on my stuff and liking it. Instead, I can just focus on spending more time on certain pieces. So anyway, with all that said, you didn't need to know any of that, and we can just skip the personal update and dive into this week's show, which of course is personal in its own way. See, last week I talked with Rosemary Steinbaum, a friend of Philip Roth, who helped convince him to leave his books and belongings to the Newark Public Library so they could make the Philip Roth Personal Library, or PRPL. This time around, I got to visit the PRPL and talk with Nadine Sergejeff, the supervising librarian who's in charge of it. Listen, the Roth Library opened in June, and it's wonderful. It's an absolute joy if you're a Roth reader. I think even if you're not, an in-depth reader of his stuff, you'll find, basically, a lot of neat things that aren't just Roth books, but things about his life, about the writing life, about the books he read and the things people sent him and the marginalia. And, the PRPL takes up 2 rooms in the Newark Public Library, plus this adjacent storage room with yet more books and literary journals. And, I got to look around for a few minutes before meeting up with Nadine, and after we wrapped, she brought me back to the PRPL to give me a little tour, especially the research room, which is, there are 2 rooms. That's the one that's closed off unless you're there for research. And the great thing is, in the storage room, they have a shelf of Roth extras, which were the duplicate copies of Roth's own books that they found in his house. No markings or anything, just like you had 50 extra copies of this or that sent by the publisher. And she said I could take a couple. And so I did. I only took a few things that I've read previously only as ebooks. And that serves no functional purpose, but it helps me make the Roth shelf of my library that much more unwieldy. Now, I've talked before, especially last week with Rosemary, about the notion of fetishizing authors or other creative figures, of wanting to own something that belonged to them. And I've never exactly subscribed to that notion, although I do have a few treasured books signed by past guests, especially this advanced reader copy of a poetry collection that Clive James inscribed for me when I recorded with him in 2015. And those are on the imaginary route that I would take out of my house in case of fire, so I could grab those on the way. They're the only things that are irreplaceable. I know the real route is out the window or off the deck. Humor me on this one. I know that nobody really thinks about, I need to make sure I grab this and this before I burn to death. But anyway, that's how I like to think of this stuff. But I'll say that, while seeing Roth's standing writing desk and his Eames chair and the little lap desk he had for that and his typewriters and a few of those objects was pretty amazing in the PRPL, I found myself more affected by just looking over the books on his shelves and some of the notes exchanged with other artistic greats. And as I mentioned last week, I've joked, but we know it's not a joke, about how I judge people by the books on their shelves. So the opportunity to look over the shelves of the author whom I've read more books by than any other author just made me plots. Like, I don't know if I'd expected to see a copy of Harold Brodkey's Runaway Soul on the shelves of Philip Roth, but now I'm left wondering whether or how those writers interacted, and I am dying to find out what Roth may have written in that copy that he had. Given that it was on the shelf in the reading room, there has to be some sort of marginalia or some markings in it. So, it's seeing things like that were just an absolute charge for me. It also, in that particular case, got me rereading Brodkey's memoir about dying, as I mentioned at the top of the show, This Wild Darkness, over the weekend. But anyway, the PRPL has some wonderful stuff on display. Like I say, it's got the writing objects of Roth's life, the books, the research materials. There's a letter from Roth to Milton Glaser, the late Milton Glaser, about the cover design for one of his late novels. And they accompany that with a print of a Glaser colored pencil drawing. And, the idea that these guys were slinging notes back and forth about book design and illustration and everything just kind of blew my mind. And there are some books on the shelves that are open to the inscriptions that the authors made to Roth and others, and some are open to Roth's notes and commentary, including, some stuff where he's angry about, the phrasing of a blurb or something like that. But anyway, the collection's an absolute joy, and I was awfully glad to get the opportunity to see it in person and to talk with Nadine about the process of organizing it. I know I haven't talked enough about Nadine and what she does. You're going to get that over the course of this conversation. In fact, let's get to it now. Here's Nadine's bio. Nadine Sergejeff is the supervising librarian of the Philip Roth Personal Library and Special Collections at Newark Public Library. She's worked at NPL since 2007. She has a background in fine art and art history, and prior to pursuing her MLIS, she was employed as a historical researcher. And now, part 2 of the Philip Roth Personal Library Virtual Memories conversation, this time featuring Nadine Sergejeff. Tell me about your work on the library, on the Philip Roth Library. I talked to Rosemary a couple of weeks ago, so I get how the process started, what happened when everything got here, but I don't know, how it all gets organized, categorized, and what made it into the personal library and what didn't.
Sure. If I recall correctly, I believe we had over 300 boxes of books. They were all kept in the same order as they were on Roth's shelves. So everything in order from Roth's New York City apartment, mainly the bedroom and the living room, and then almost every room in the house in Connecticut. So we carefully went through all the boxes, and you've probably heard that almost all of the books had pieces of paper in them, notes, receipts. So we removed all of those. When there were sticky notes, we documented all those pages, photocopied them, removed the sticky notes for archival reasons. So there's about 16 boxes now just of all this ephemera that we found. And Once the shelves were ready, that was mid-May, it was quite a rush to get everything on the shelves in time for the opening. So about a week we spent shelving everything. So what you see when you walk into the library are about 3,720 books that have,
I don't know the exact number.
just about, yes, that have marginalia or are presentation copies or just are special in some sort of way. And then the remainder, over 2,000, are kept in an adjacent storage room. And that in itself was a tedious process because we couldn't label the books, couldn't put them in regular Dewey Decimal order. So as we shelved each book, we had to go into the catalog record, and the system basically is there are 5 elevations of bookshelves. So every catalog record will tell you which elevation, which case number, and which shelf number.
It's like my library at home where everything is just a map of my brain. Like there's some organizational principle there, but it's really, what's up in here. I can just reach and know exactly what I need to get. But I can imagine when it's a public setting, that's a little more difficult to implement and to justify in some ways.
Yes.
Were the ones that aren't on display non-marginaliaed, less marked up, or what was the criteria for what made it, in public display?
Correct. So whatever went into storage really did not have any markings in them. There were times where Roth owned 5 copies of a particular book, so the extra copies went into storage. He also had lots of journals. So all those journals also went into storage, almost full runs.
Literary journals or his own?
Correct,
Okay.
Yeah, literary journals. And then a few times we found where Roth liked to purchase a lot of books used for research purposes, and maybe when a book was out of print or he couldn't find it, appears that he had a researcher go and copy the books for him at libraries. So there'd be photocopied binders of books that perhaps had a little bit of markings in them, but for aesthetic reasons just really wouldn't look nice in the public view.
Understood. What was your history with Roth and his work? Had you been a reader of his before this project began?
I was familiar with it. In no way am I a Roth scholar.
Or fan. I mean fan in the fanatic sort of sense.
I appreciate his work. Going through the books, I had read a few. I've read quite a bit more since the project started. And I really appreciate the time he put into the books and all the Newark references and just how much he loved the library.
Mm-hmm. And had you interacted with him before his death?
No, I never met him. So I was working in general reference when I first started, and I was working at the library when we organized the exhibit in honor of his 80th birthday on the 2nd floor. So he would come in evenings and look at the exhibit, but we didn't run into one another.
Is it something you regret? Or, because some people have don't like meeting authors. Other people other people spend their weekends doing things like this, where they sit down with people and chat for a conversation.
I would have loved to have the opportunity to just learn more about him and what impacted him, and even to have helped to organize the exhibit, to spend time with him, to look through the pictures and all of that.
Yeah. What surprised you about the collection? And do you have a prized thing? Well, tell me what surprised you first.
A few things. I think I mentioned 1 or 2. So just how detailed he was when reading works and commenting on them. So not only works that he read earlier on. So he had this habit of actually signing and putting a year on certain books. So we know, not all of them, but we know which books he read in the 1950s. We found one from 1947 the other day. So he's questioning why this, why that, certain themes or character traits in books. He does the same thing with his own books. So there might be a copy of the ghostwriter, for example. I don't remember how many copies are marked up, but sometimes he marked up more than one copy with just corrections and things that he noticed later on that he would have changed, which were then, never published again, or those corrections weren't made, but you can look through the books and see what he was thinking.
I used to be a small press publisher and had a relatively famous science fiction author I worked with who every day, for a chapbook that we did, every day he had corrections and changes and little emendations. And I discovered his great masterpiece work that he was best known for. Whenever he would see it in bookstores, he always put in little index cards with lines that needed to be changed and little edits. Just anybody who picked up the book would understand what Samuel Delany wanted in his thing versus the edition they had actually picked up. Writers can be a little crazy.
It seemed he was very, very particular. So prior to acquiring this collection, we had some manuscripts that were, typescripts actually, that were donated by Roth's colleague, Joel Canaro. And we had an archivist years ago go through the collection, and there was one loose yellow line piece of paper that had been identified as a page from the anatomy lesson. And when I looked at it a little closely, I was trying to match up the sentences in Google Books, for example, and nothing was correlating. After spending so much time, there was just one mention of a particular hat a woman was wearing, and that linked up to the ghostwriter. But if you look at the paragraph that was published in the book, every sentence had been changed.
Yeah, that's when I talked to Jacques Berliner Blau just last week, he mentions, and he's talked about it in interviews, apparently in the Library of Congress archives of Roth's other manuscripts, work, letters, etc. There's a completely different ghostwriter. I don't know if you've read it, but the fantasy that Amy Bellette is Anne Frank, he has a draft where it's not a fantasy. She actually is Anne Frank and wants to sleep with Nathan Zuckerman. And Roth eventually decided maybe that's not the version that needs to come into the world, and ended up making what a lot of people consider his best novel. But yeah, it's must be amazing to sort of see those iterations and the ways things could have gone, I guess, in the course of things.
And then just going through the books, we had less than a year to go through most of the materials, because all the 6,000 books, roughly 6,000 books from Connecticut, we didn't pick up until July of 2020. And then we began processing in August, of course, during the pandemic when the library was closed, but a certain number of people were allowed to come in. So from August to May, trying to go through all those books. And the first time, later on, I noticed there was marginalia on the back of a dust jacket. So we went through them again, and sometimes it was really hidden. Sometimes it was just along the spine on the back of a book, yeah. Sometimes just on the flap, and it didn't always correspond to that particular book. So there were notes to I Married a Communist and American Pastoral on some of them.
Yeah, how do you I would say label or categorize those for researchers who are interested? Like, how are you documenting the marginalia and the things that you're discovering?
The notes the records don't go into that much detail. So that ephemera collection that we created, the dust jackets go in there, and then there's just, a note saying there's marginalia. So. Yeah,
that's what I wonder, if you can possibly start, building categories for all that stuff, at which point you become a research library and not a public library.
Because even with the books, I began by saying marginalia on pages 3, 7, 22, and then that would have taken me years.
I couldn't imagine the process. But have researchers started to come in and I noticed the reading room I haven't gotten into, and you do have to let me into that before I leave.
Of course.
So, at least so I could check out the Eames chair and.
Yes. Oh, yes. We've had researchers from around the world contacting us. many have already spent a few days looking through the materials. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Looking forward to seeing what some of the discoveries or the inferences are, what they either find or conclude must have been the case. But how was the opening? How was the celebration when you actually got to open up in the middle of, well, late pandemic? We're hoping it's late pandemic, but.
Sure, we had the ribbon cutting with the mayor, who is very familiar with Roth, and he spoke about the importance of reading, and anybody can become a writer, and it's all about inspiration. So we had some city officials here, and it was fantastic to see all of our hard work come together, and everybody was amazed, and the mayor spent quite a bit of time looking through the exhibit that we have.
I don't mean it in the wrong way, but did the pandemic and its restrictions help at all, just in terms of focusing on this project and not having people in and out of the library, or was everything a nightmare because of the pandemic? So.
In my opinion, I think it was helpful because there was so much construction that needed to be done, and there were surprises that we uncovered, such as asbestos. So the remediation was able to take place when the public was not in the building. But on the other hand, materials were in short supply. They were sitting on trucks for a while because I think there weren't enough drivers. So parts of the project stalled, and I think we're surprised that we pulled it off in time.
Yeah, I remember one of the time frames. It was just, I think I first read about it, middle of 2020, and it was like, really? Well, okay, if you think you're going to pull this off by next summer, that's which again, I'm awfully glad you did. But tell me about your history with the library, and then we'll talk about how you became a librarian.
Sure. I started here in 2007 when I was in my last semester of the library science program at Rutgers. So I started off as a part-time library associate at the reference desk, and then when I graduated, I became full-time. So I worked in reference for a while. In 2012, when the Special Collections Department at the library, which contains thousands of fine prints and rare books, and any kind of work on paper, was basically left unstaffed. I migrated my way over to that department, so was wearing two hats at that time. For a while, I was also serving as webmaster and social media person. My role here has changed over the years. Then I was sort of the digital initiatives person here, and when the Roth project came about, because I was already dealing with rare books here at the library, I was assigned to begin the inventory, and it went from there. And when the position opened, I transferred from special collections to become the supervising librarian of the Philip Roth Personal Library.
There's the one of the lessons I had from my office days, and fortunately I've been out of office life for 7 years now. The two worst words you can say are "no problem." Whenever anybody asks, "Hey, can you take care of this for me?" And it's, "Oh, no problem." And that's how you end up, I think, yes. Gaining all the different hats that you wore over time.
But it's, it's improved my skill set, and now I'm doing everything I love because I have a background in museum studies and library science, and it works out.
Yeah, where did that begin for you?
So let's see, I got my bachelor's in fine art because I first thought I was going to become an artist.
See, I only took up drawing and painting this year at 50. So I sidestepped any careerist aspirations and just went straight to the hobbyist thing down the line. But anyway, that's enough about my career.
I love drawing and painting. And then one day I came to the realization I have a shed in the backyard that's just full of my artwork. And what am I ever going to do? And how am I going to earn any money off of that? So I decided I was going to go into a museum studies program at Seton Hall, and when I finished that, reality sort of set in that there were many entry-level positions that really weren't paying all that much. I had interned at the New Jersey State Museum and the Morris Museum, and during that time, I became employed at a cultural resources management firm in Trenton. So everything sort of switched over, and I was working as a research assistant and then got promoted to historian. I even got to do some archaeology. And during the process, I visited libraries and historical societies. I got to go to the National Archives. I dug through manuscripts and deeds. I was always at the county courthouse in the clerk's office doing deed searches, because if we were doing archaeology on a historical property, I needed to write up the whole history, and I just found it fascinating. I loved visiting places, being helped by librarians, and I said, I could do this. I'm become familiar with the records, so then I decided, okay, I'll go back to school, and I'm going to become a librarian.
Did the historian background help in this particular phase of your career now? Or has it helped inform the entire librarian side of your
Yeah, I think it helped form the entire librarian side, yes.
So try to figure, well, it's a different sort of archaeology, but it's, you're looking through the strata of an author's life like that. That's got to be, somebody else is going to do, big research around this stuff, but you're still, doing that preliminary work and understanding what's there and what may be valuable and what things are the fifth copy of book X that,
Correct. And it all ties in. And a funny thing that I heard from somebody is that a lot of people who are entering, who want to study archives, they're a little younger and many can't read cursive. So I myself have trouble with some of Rod's handwriting. It's interesting.
I was looking at some of the notes and I was like, I guess that's what it says.
Earlier on, it was in print, very neat, and then the handwriting changed over time. It got a bit worse, so I can make parts of it out, but not all of it. But students who are entering the programs now, I think that's something they need to learn.
Mm-hmm. Is there and again, I mentioned I'm 50, so I'm around before the internet. It was really just beginning in its basics when I was in college and grad school. That sense of the virtual versus the actual when it comes to history and these sorts of studies that need to actually have the physical thing in front of you at some point, that it's not all just Google searchable. This is all going to get to the question of what makes a real library, but I'm curious.
Yeah, sure. I can tell you that even from the reference department, when students came in and thought they could just find everything on Wikipedia, we have so many obscure items here that you'll never find online. And even items in the special collections department that, because there's so much material, we don't know all of it. And somebody will find a reference in a bibliography from 1899 saying, well, but this is listed here. And those bibliographies aren't online either.
And so I wonder whether they're paradoxically going to believe the thing they see digitally instead of the thing they see in print in front of them. That, I don't believe this. I didn't see it on Google. That it's somehow less real, even though it's our physical thing. So what makes a good library? I
would say, in general, I think the Newark Public Library is fantastic because it was commenced with the idea that it was democratic. Even the fine art in the collection, anybody, if they could come and look at it. There was even a collection that people could take home and borrow to decorate their walls with. So unlike a museum where items are kept in a vault, the belief here was always to educate, allow people to touch items, and to gain an appreciation of literature and art. So even in the Philip Roth Personal Library, we have many people coming in who haven't heard of Roth, students, and they're amazed looking at the cases, learning a little bit about Newark and what the author accomplished. So it's really an educational experience.
Yeah, how much do you, contrast the Newark he grew up in and the Newark of present? I don't mean any grand sociological treatise on your part, but just, understanding the roots of Newark, or at least from that 1930s period onwards.
So Roth writes a lot about the Jewish neighborhood, and at that time there were so many ethnic clusters, neighborhoods of Italians, neighborhoods of Jewish people. So of course, Newark has become extremely diverse, and there's just different pockets now. But I think at that time, that's sort of what was different that evolved over time. Mm-hmm. So I think there's one important synagogue that still has exhibits of Jewish history here.
And I don't know if contemporary readers, if you encounter them, or at least people coming to the library, get, what some of the history was like. How much are they picking up on, the city they live in and how it's changed over generations?
I'm not sure. I think that's why we also, we have a local history room here, the Charles F. Cummings New Jersey Information Center, and they put up exhibits annually that discuss the history of Newark. So we do try to inform people about history and how much it's evolved.
When you were developing as a fine artist, who were your artistic heroes?
I enjoyed the Impressionists.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I liked Monet and Degas, but I feel that's really a lot of what they taught. So it was really primarily French artists, and only once I became familiar with the fine print collection here did I gain an appreciation of more of the pop and contemporary art. I felt that was only the intro class. And then when you got into the heavy art history classes, it was very 19th century Europe.
And you evolved into the 20th, again, mid-century Abex sort of guys, or more into the pop art, Warhol and beyond?
All and beyond.
Yeah.
Yes.
Favorite museum? It can be a history museum, art museum, whatever. It's
I guess the Museum d'Orsay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The guy who founded it just died at like 90-something years old. And it's one of the obit for him goes into like everything he had to do to get Orsay not turned into a hotel, which was the plan. And he also redid the Louvre, but less interesting, I guess.
That was too much for me. That trying to absorb all of that in a day.
The Louvre, oh yeah, it becomes a greatest hits thing, or you end up focusing too much on one piece of art and realizing you're never going to see everything else in the world. But
the Newark Museum here in town is a gem also.
Yeah, I've never been. As I was telling you, I literally never get off McCarter and the one road that leads me right to Newark Penn Station. So I need to look at this city more while I'm here. But I walk by the art museum. They're doing a street fair today, which worried me because they had loudspeakers and stuff. But we're in a good position; we can't hear them. But tell me about yourself when it comes to books. I mean, you're around both the books and the ephemera. Are you a book collector at home? Does a job satisfy the need to be around books? And with all the ephemera, are you really careful about, your own piling up pamphlets, ephemera, etc. in your own life?
I used to have shelves and shelves of art books. And then I realized that I didn't really consult them. So I donated most of them to the library. There was a period when I was working as a historian, I began collecting 18th and 19th century New Jersey history books. Right now, my collection primarily consists of a few cookbooks. That's really about it. I downsized, and I don't like to have a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I understand. As a person who, I'll just say, accumulated a lot of books over the years, that's been the periodic, I need to look at all these things that I'm either never going to read or never going to reread, and take them to Montclair Book Center or somewhere to just take these away from me, because otherwise, once you fill the shelves and then you start with the stacks on the floor, it really...
That's exactly how it was in Roth's homes, even stacks in the bathroom, and myself, I get sort of a panic attack of so much material.
Mm-hmm. Do you keep margin notes? I mean, again, primarily cookbooks now, but,
I tend to print things off, or I make notes on a piece of paper and insert them into the books. I don't like writing in books. Even if I bought a used book for college, for example, and there was highlighting in it, that really bothered me.
The same way. I feel, kindred spirit. Basically, there's just that sense of, it's been touched. I do dog-ear pages, and then I try to figure out what was on the page that I actually cared about. But
if I did, very rarely in light pencil so that it could be erased.
Yeah. My other fear was, of course, that my future biographers or, criminal investigators would open the book and, my God, he had the most banal thoughts in the world. Why would he? So I just don't write anything down for that reason. But again, we've all got our motives, I suppose. But tell me about your New Jersey. What does the state mean to you? I've been here my entire life.
So have I.
Yeah.
So let's see. I was raised in Howell, but born in Lakewood because Howell doesn't have a hospital. I lived there for many years. I lived in Burlington County for a while. Lived in Long Branch. I'm now in Morris County. It's a wonderful state with museums and parks and the shore, and I don't think I see myself leaving. Yes, it's congested, but it's got everything I'd want.
Yeah. And when it came to history and understanding, as you're helping research and working on these things and discovering, for me, my town, you enter and it's the founded 1742 sort of thing, and you realize, at least as far as America goes, that's history. You go to Europe and they laugh at numbers like that, but, at least here it matters. That sense that, you live somewhere that actually has some past to it.
Yes, I remember even when I was helping out in archaeology, we were doing work on Route 29 in Trenton, and I also helped out at Morven in Princeton, and the items we were finding, so Native American artifacts, arrowheads, some of our digs we found bullets, pieces of pottery. There's a lot of history in New Jersey.
It's, again, growing up with this sort of stuff has been pretty amazing. But with the collection here, I was going to ask, prized possession. Is there something there that you're like, wow, I can't believe we have this from Roth's work or his library?
So we wound up acquiring a lot more than just books. So all of Roth's diplomas, awards, even his collection of LPs. There were just things that were left over when we went to pick items up. Remember, I was walking out the door and I opened a closet and there was that tweed jacket that Roth was photographed in, and then he wore a lot. So I grabbed that too. So to me, that's pretty special. I don't know if we'll ever display it, and it's full of moth holes. But little items like his radio, we have his blank notepads, even his phone. I would say I prize the scrapbooks that we found. He had a library room at the back of his house, which he actually installed library-grade shelving and contained about 2,500 nonfiction books. And we missed it the first time we were there. Second time I went, there was, I forget if it was HP or a Dell printer box on the floor with masking tape on top, Roth's handwriting, printer. So nobody had opened it, and we opened it, and there were 7 scrapbooks that his mother compiled full of book reviews and a few letters, and each scrapbook was for a particular novel, and I thought that was so sweet. And even the clippings, how perfectly arranged they are on the pages, nothing is crooked.
Did that include the condemnatory sort of letters about, or columns about Roth too, or did she just?
Well,
clip out the
there
good
was
stuff?
one for Portnoy's, and
Okay.
yes, there were bad reviews in them.
Yeah, I wasn't sure because one of my favorite basketball players from the 80s and 90s was from Africa, from Nigeria, and his parents thought he had never lost a game because he only sent them the tapes of their wins. He never sent the games that they actually lost. So, yeah, sometimes the parents get a little skewed idea of this stuff. But do you feel a greater appreciation, I guess, of Roth and his work through this project? Do you find yourself being drawn more into the books, becoming more of a Roth fan, I guess, or at least a reader, as you'd say?
Yes, just even the research for Plot Against America and the stamps, whether it was the stamp that was featured on the cover or the discussion of stamp collecting inside, there were printouts from the internet about FDR and different kinds of stamps. And then I think Roth purchased every book he could on stamps. So many books in the collection included invoices from Amazon or a Libri, where Roth specified and purchased used books just for that topic. And of course, there were many topics in, for example, Plot Against America. And when you walk into the library, the shelves that are facing the exhibition space, some of those are from the books from the studio, the writing studio, and those contained all of the research books for Nemesis and Plot Against America. And you could just see how thorough he was. And even when reading other people's books, if there was a fact that was incorrect, he would write a letter and correct them.
Which, again, Jewish mother, that sense of having to correct, and not just internally, but letting the other person know that they're wrong. It's apparently super critical for us. What have you been reading?
Philip Roth.
Okay.
Yes. So there are a few that I haven't read, and now I'm also trying to reread ones that I have gone through just so I could make more sense with some of the notes that I'm finding.
It's always a tough question to ask, but I'll close out with it. Do you have a favorite Roth novel? You can sidestep it by saying I do this for work, so there are no favorites, but deep down I know you want to answer this one.
I liked Exit Ghost.
Yeah? Interesting. Had you read all the other Zuckerman stuff leading up to it, or were you reading sort of out of order and based on what the work required?
Out of order. So I was home for a while, and I should have taken the books that we have here because actually in Roth's own attic, there are 900 copies of his own novels, hundreds and hundreds. And for some reason, I just didn't think of it. So whatever I could access as an ebook was what I was reading. So I was sort of skipping around.
Yeah, I read that one in airport in Belfast. I had an 8-hour delay because there's only one plane coming from here, and it was delayed. So there was all the time. So basically, I just sat there with my Kindle reading Exit Ghost the first time and didn't like it because of the whole circumstances I was stuck in. I reread it and got a lot more out of it. So, especially the George Plimpton stuff, but that takes me in another direction completely. But I think all these people, sort of literary lions from the past that we read about but never actually get to talk to. But at least we get this wonderful collection, this great library. And you're going to show me around?
Yes, I will.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, Nadine.
You're welcome.
And that was Nadine Sergejeff. Go visit the Philip Roth Public Library. It's an absolute treasure. It's at the main branch of the Newark Public Library at 5 Washington Street in Newark, New Jersey. There's more information at prpl.npl.org. PRPL as in Philip Roth Personal Library, NPL as in Newark Public Library, org as in org. You should also check out its Twitter feed, which is PhilipRoth_NPL. And if you're on Instagram, it is Philip Roth Personal Library, all one word. I know these are kind of clunky. I will have them all in the show and episode notes for this one. But I really hope you do check the place out. And you need to make a reservation or, fill out the appointment form if you want to check out the reading and research room, which is totally worth it. And if you talk to Nadine, tell her I sent you. And if you haven't listened yet, go check out last week's episode of this show also, because that one has Rosemary Steinbaum, a trustee of Newark Public Library and a friend of Philip Roth, talking about how the PRPL came into existence, how they convinced Roth to leave his books to the NPL, and a whole lot more. She's more of a Roth fan, so it's a neat interplay having both her and Nadine as the two guests for these two episodes. And I'm very thankful that PRPL and Newark Public Library helped put it together. Now, you could support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this guy out there, and he keeps doing this podcast every week with interesting figures about books, art, movies, comics, whatever. You can also send me postcards, letters, emails, or leave me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck talking to me where I would blather on like I do now. But if you do write me or call, just tell me what you like about the show and what you don't like. Tell me who you'd like to hear me record with, or what piece of art, culture, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. I'm always looking for good ideas for people to record with, as well as neat stuff to check out artistically. Now, if you have money to spare, do not give it to me. I'm doing just fine. This episode cost $10 for parking. There were probably tolls at some point because I went on to Jersey City to visit an old friend of mine afterwards, but whatever. Didn't cost much, and frankly, I have a day job that covers all of this stuff just fine. If you do have money or other resources to spare, I would ask that you help individuals or institutions in need. And you can do that, especially for individuals, through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and other crowdfunding means like that. Sometimes it's about supporting people's artistic projects. Other times it's trying to support their medical, or trying to pay off their medical bills. There's an awful lot you can do for individuals that way. If you're more comfortable giving to institutions, I would suggest you look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, Climate Funds. There are a lot of ways that we can all work towards building a better world. So I hope you'll help. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.